first cab off the rank? What is the first data metric that we are chatting to? Because maybe rather than going into the future, let's look in the past about what has happened in 2023.
Yes. The past informs the future, they say. They also say that past performance is no guarantee of future performance, but I think there is something to share here. So let me share my screen, and this one will be a window because I know you like windows, and I can zoom in for you, Joe, because obviously you're getting old.
Of that age.
Yeah, zoom in for that
if
one.
If you're playing along at home, jump on we are on YouTube as well. So if you're not watching, jump on our YouTube now and throw some comments on YouTube as well. So we'll have to. Here we go. So what are we talking through here, Mike? Data and where property.
So
you talk to rents first.
Anecdote, no rents. This is where people are buying. Okay, and I think that rents are part of the story. Sorry,
interesting. Yeah. People purchases increase in the ACT.
Yes. Yeah. Like markedly. But this story to me is really all about Perth. Anecdotally, we knew Perth was crazy. That's really why I commissioned this research. So at the time, this was kind of the first indication of, some of the transaction amounts or values that were happening over in WA. So we actually compared Q1 2022 to Q1 2023. And for the first time ever, WA rocketed into second position as the most popular state. Now, WA is a little bit peculiar in that 75% of Western Australians live in and around Perth. So I sort of say WA and Perth interchangeably. I probably shouldn't, but there's enough evidence to say that it's a pretty big whack of the state, right? So
Isn't it similar to Adelaide though? Like would you say a similar proportion live in Adelaide?
Very much so, yeah.
I would say, I don't have the data to hand, but I would say so, right? I mean, that's not a very big state and lots of it is very dusty. And, people don't go in for that. WA is the same. So 9.38% of investors were selecting WA.
Bugger all.
In 2022. Yeah, and that rocketed to 31.86%. So the biggest increase at 22.49% from Q1 2022 to Q1 2023. And it basically stole off every other state, right? And I think some of the big losers, you could speak to some of the policies in and around that time. So the Queensland land tax stuff, that was sort of bubbling up at that particular point in time. Victoria
it's crazy how much that sets the that sets people's minds of, oh my gosh, there's a Queensland land tax, which didn't go through, by the way, but how much it actually stopped people from buying in that state.
Yes, and I do actually have some specific data on that as well, and maybe I won't chuck it up on the screen.
No,
but
I'll cut you off.
That's all right. But I did a presentation to Pippa late last year and had a segment called Stupid Political Decisions, which I didn't know at the time the shadow housing minister was going to be in attendance, and I had this big picture of Dan Andrews going, yay, and I sort of panicked, but I realised, well, no, he's on the other team. But let's have a look at Queensland for that point in time. So we actually crunched the data and shared it in a press release. There was a 98-day period where we surmised that people could purchase full well knowing that this land tax change in Queensland was going to happen, right? It was a very tight window. So we had heaps of data on the front end of that, but we only had 98 days sample size, but we actually thought it was quite significant. And Queensland went from attracting about 40.9% of all investment to 33.6%. So a 17.8% fall as soon as that land tax stuff was legislated. And it was legislated. It was due to come in 1 July. It was just repealed. Now, why did that sort of become part of the stupid political decisions? Well, I think because it was hopefully designed to mitigate rental affordability problems, but it actually made it worse because not only did investors stop buying into Queensland, quite a few investors sold. And,
so
there are... Yeah, exactly. So there were plenty of data houses that shared that information. And what really gets me about that one is that it was repealed, and there was some great lobbying work from people like Pippa and the REIQ, Antonia, who's a powerhouse. But it was repealed, and the reason why they said they got rid of it is not because it was a bad idea, it's because the other states wouldn't play ball and give them the data. So, for example, New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet said that we're not going to tell you what our New South Welshmen, Welsh women and men, I don't know how you're supposed to say that now. We're not going to share that data with you just so you can tax them, right? Because that was the idea. It's like, okay, if you own an investment property in Queensland, we'll tax you on that, but it will tax you on everything else combined together around the country. It was the most ludicrous thing in the world, but it changed investor behaviour, and we don't have enough data yet to show that happening in Victoria from a statistical, robust point of view, but I can tell you it's happening. People are avoiding Victoria like the plague.
Yeah. Average investment property in New South Wales, so investment, is $1.12 million.
That's the average of every transaction that we've seen in the last 7 months. That is the average purchase price. Now, there are certainly outliers in that. We do see some hyper expensive ones, and that will sort of skew New South Wales to some degree. I think it's probably a little bit
what's
better
the sample
to look
size on that anyway, Mike? Are you talking sort of hundreds, or are you talking thousands?
We're talking thousands, yeah.
And why do you do average over median?
Essentially, we are just looking for every outlier and bunging it into a middle ground. So, I mean, yeah, we can segment it any way you like, right? But I think the important takeaway from this is that the average that people are spending is 673. And if you use ChatGPT, which I know you're a big fan of, Joe, to remove the outliers, such as its statistical engine likes to do, you're actually probably looking around that 560 mark across the country. Now, let's say it's somewhere around that $600,000 range that the average purchaser is paying. Where that begs the question, where do you go? Where do you go that has the right fundamentals, that is an investor grade style property, that has, the right split of renters versus owner occupiers? It has, a reasonable socioeconomic score. It has the affordability where the people are earning X as a percentage of the rent. Yeah, their housing costs is no more than, say, 35%. So I think 2023 saw affordable markets much more in vogue. And I think, Queensland and WA really kind of fit that bill. I think Adelaide to some degree, but it had a pretty good run. But WA was, at the bottom of that cycle there. So I think that's really my big takeaway from what happened in 2023. Well, people went into affordable markets. We saw a huge rental crisis, and I think that's going to play out politically in 2024 in the lead up to the 2025 federal election and some state elections. So to me, it's all about that rental affordability and that price point affordability.
If I've got a budget of 400 or 450 or 500, I'm just looking at that now because not everybody can afford a 600K investment property. Like what is the answer to, maybe we can't come up with an answer, but what does somebody do who has that sort of budget? Do they just not buy? Like how do they get their way into the investment or buy their next investment property? What have you sort of seen with that?
Some people, I've heard buyer's agents before say, if your budget isn't 800K, come back when you have 800K, and they just sort of won't touch it, right? But it's a bloody big country with all sorts of different fundamentals, and there's still plenty of opportunities for investments sub 600 in houses and sub 500 in units that tick a lot of investor fundamentals. So I was having a chat to Mr. Lardner, a friend of mine, on this particular subject, and he's actually given me a list of 10 SA2 regions that he sees under 600K that meet his investor score criteria. So we're talking places like Griffith in the Riverina, Tumbarumba in the Riverina as well, Cobar, which is far west, Wagga Wagga, Young, Scone, Leeton. New South Wales is obviously well represented in this particular list. And then when we're talking units, I mean, there are still actually locations in WA that have extreme affordability. But again, those big regions, which are kind of like the big smoke of the country. So say, for example, Dubbo, it has a unit median price of 455, right? And when it comes to housing, I think we're talking around about 32% housing cost, and an investor score of 83, according to Mr. Lardner's Secret Herbs and Spices, right? So that is the kind of place where everyone kind of goes to Dubbo because people will live disparate all around that region, but it's kind of the city of that region sort of thing. So if people just kind of want to turn off and watch Netflix, then I think there's plenty of opportunities in the regions. I wouldn't be waiting, to have $800,000-$900,000 to buy an investment property. There are so many regions out there with such great fundamentals, is that it's just a matter of looking for them and doing your due diligence on them.
You buy a unit in Dubbo?
I'm not a real unit man, right? So the units are really into this list because to meet all of those fundamentals sub 500, you can't get much land for that. So yeah, you can still buy houses, sub 500,000 in many places across the country, but they might be too high a percentage of renters versus owner occupiers. The housing affordability stress might be a little bit too high. The CFA index might be a little bit too low. So that's why that lens is on there. But yeah, I much prefer houses and a bit more of a land asset ratio personally.
Yeah, I'm with you with that. But it's not to say, like, when I was first investing, I almost bought a unit because it just made sense. Like I was someone actually passed away in the unit, and they were in there for weeks after that, and then they had to remove the kitchen, all the carpet, the skirting boards, the whole place was completely bare, and I could buy it for $80,000 less than what it was worth, and I would have spent 25 grand on a renovation. So everything is investment worthy if you can, at the right price. Everything has a price, and it depends on where your strategy is and what you're trying to achieve. And you can make money in units, you can make money in townhouses, but it's for a long-term fundamental hold, I think you're going to get more value out of a house with land, because land is what soaks up the economic activity of an area. And if you've got a good proportion of land to asset, you're going to do all right. And
absolutely.
Development potential.
And we were talking off air about the difference in houses versus units. Units were very, very popular in 2017, 18. It was almost like a 50-50 split for investors.
Really?
But now it's around about 16% of investors are purchasing units rather than houses.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think COVID is probably one of the big ones. You've also got Opal Towers, Mascot Towers, cladding, and the one-bedroom apartments. We actually saw double-digit vacancy rates in some of our CBDs during COVID. Like, people talk about crisis levels of accommodation and vacancy rates. There was a time where I knew a property management firm in Victoria that converted to a sales firm because all of their investors wanted to sell during COVID because they couldn't rent them out. These are, off the plan, high-rise apartments and that sort of thing.
Right.
And when you look at, if I look at the data from 2019 to 2023, I've got the average price that people are paying. So between 2019 and 2023, we saw an increase of 25% for houses. So people are paying 25% more than they were in 2009 for houses, whereas units only 11% more. So units really, really underperformed. And during COVID, there were a few people that were brave enough to sort of say, look, I actually think that this is sub-construction cost real estate that we can get in these units. And once the international student tap comes back on and, say, international migration comes back on, I could be sitting on something here. So, I mean, it's not for the faint-hearted, but there's money to be made in units. But for me, it's those boutique small block of units that people have done, quite well at. And if you've only got a certain amount to invest, it does beg the question, do you wait for that blue chip asset? Do you wait for that house? I don't think you necessarily need to. I think if you're clever about it and you're not buying from one of those run to the back of the room at this seminar and we'll give you 10% off and a free consultation with a bearded chap. No, I shouldn't do that to Steve. He's not a spruiker. If you're not buying that off the plan rubbish, which Steve definitely doesn't sell, then there are ways to make money. Absolutely.
Yeah. How would you kind of summarize our 2023, and what are some things we should look for in 2024 going forward for our wonderful investor community?
Well, hopefully we'll look to some relief in the interest rate space. Stephen Koukoulas, the Kook, clue is in the name sometimes.
He gets destroyed on Twitter, poor bloke.
Yeah. He's been calling for a cut for a long time, but I think the economic consensus is that it's not going to be March, and in fact, there's some March inflation data that they're going to want to be looking at. But hopefully, we see that in the back end of the year. But people shouldn't be waiting for that to decide on whether to purchase in property, because if we go back to this very live that we did roughly the same time at the start of 2023. The property market had declined by 8.6%. I mean, it's so easy to forget that, right? Like, it was absolutely crazy, that bottom of the market. So look, for 2024, I expect the trends to kind of continue. Rental affordability will still be a major issue. I don't think it can go as hard as it has. I think people will change their behaviour, but I think all the fundamentals are there. And I worry about state intervention into housing. I haven't seen any eloquent or well thought out policies that made me feel confident in the property knowledge of our state or even federal politicians. And that is a big worry for me. Of course, personally, we might kind of think, all right, well, we've got investment properties. If there's less of them, it just puts more pressure up on rent. That's kind of great, but I don't think it's necessarily great for society. And I think affordability will still be a main focus. Let's say we get a September rate cut. Rates are still quite a lot higher than those old 2% loans that are coming off that 5-year fixed term, right? So we're not going to see a huge reprieve there. So I think affordability and looking at those tight rental markets, that's where investors can have some great opportunities.
Yeah. And you can do all that research yourself, right? Like, you don't need any kind of special tools. You've just got to kind of dig into real estate, dig into Domain. What I am also finding is on real estate and Domain, they have like a median median rental price, and it's just nowhere near the reality of what things are actually listing for, unfortunately. So you do have to kind of dig into what type of asset am I purchasing, 3-bed or 4-bed, and then go through and see what those prices are. But yeah, if an area has a whole heap, like what you did with the postcodes, there's thousands of properties there and there's only 4 rentals. Wow, that's interesting. Why is there only 4 people renting? 4 people out of the entire suburb are renting their houses. That might spell opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, I think the other thing that people data is fantastic. I love data. For me, I'm a big fan of actually speaking to the people who are at the coalface, as in your property managers, and if you can, yes, visit the location, because you really need to. Because the data can say one thing, but if affordability is starting to really put pressure on people, and you can see it a little bit in ABS data. ABS data is fantastic, but it is lagging now. You're probably 2 years, 3 years. Yeah, so it's lagging. So rents have probably gone up sort of a good amount, and incomes may have gone up. So if it's speaking to your property manager, they will see what's happening, how many sort of applications are getting, the quality of those as well, because it's all good and well to say, yes, there's only 2 or 3 properties available, but now rents have gone up $200 in the last 12 or 18 months. How much more can the average person sort of in that suburb continue to pay for rents? And it has that sort of meta ceiling. Is there a ceiling on those rents?